White Cobra present Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen, adapted and directed by Rebecca Cockcroft. Episode 3. Elizabeth awoke the next morning to the same thoughts and meditations, and she resolved soon after breakfast to indulge herself in air and exercise. She was on the point of turning back towards the parsonage when she caught a glimpse of a gentleman striding towards her.
Miss Bennet.
Oh no. Mr. Darcy?
I've been walking in the grove some time in the hope of meeting you. Will you do me the honour of reading that letter? Fitzwilliam and I are departing this morning, so you need not fear meeting me in the park again during your stay. Good day, Miss Bennet.
Be not alarmed, madam, on receiving this letter, by the apprehension of its containing any repetition of those sentiments or renewal of those offers which were last night so disgusting to you. I would hardly have expected it to, sir.
2 offences of a very different nature you last night laid to my charge. The severity of that blame I shall hope to be cleared of when the following account of my actions and their motives have been read. If, in the explanation of them, I am under the necessity of relating feelings which may be offensive to yours, I can only say that I am sorry.
I do not believe you capable of being sorry.
I had not been long in Hertfordshire before I saw that Bingley admired your sister. I had often seen him in love before, but I could perceive that his partiality for Miss Bennet was beyond what I had ever witnessed in him. Your sister I also watched. Her look and manners were open and cheerful and engaging as ever, but I remained convinced that though she received his attentions with pleasure, she did not invite them by any participation of sentiment.
I will not believe this to be true. Jane's affections could not be doubted by any who saw them together.
I did not believe her to be indifferent because I wished it. I believed it on impartial conviction. But there were other objections, such as the total want of propriety so frequently displayed by your mother, by your 3 younger sisters, and occasionally even your father. Bingley's sisters and I, sensible that no time was to be lost in detaching their brother, shortly resolved on joining him directly in London. And there I readily engaged in the office of pointing out the certain evils of such a choice. There is but one part of my conduct in the whole affair on which I did not reflect with satisfaction: that I concealed from Bingley your sister's being in town. Perhaps this disguise was beneath me. It is done, however, and it was done for the best. On this subject I have no more to say, no other apology to offer. If I have wounded your sister's feelings, it was unknowingly done.
You hurtful man.
With respect to that other, more weighty accusation of having injured Mr. Wickham, I can only refute it by laying before you the whole of his connection with my family. Of what he has particularly accused me, I am ignorant. But of the truth of what I shall relate, I can summon more than one witness of undoubted veracity. My excellent father died about 5 years ago, and his attachment to Mr. Wickham was to the last so steady that in his will he particularly recommended that, if he made the church his profession, he desired that a valuable family living might be his as soon as it became vacant.
Of all of this I am already aware. In what imaginary act of friendship can you here defend yourself?
As for myself, it is many, many years since I first began to think of him in a very different manner, since witnessing his unguarded behaviour when he was not in my father's company. After my father's death, Mr. Wickham wrote to inform me that, having finally resolved against going into the church, he hoped I should not think it unreasonable for him to expect a financial inheritance in lieu of the living. He had some intention of studying law. I wished, rather than believed him to be sincere, but I was perfectly ready to accede to his proposal. The business was therefore soon settled, and he accepted from me the sum of £3,000.
The law? I wonder then if his joining the militia.
His studying the law was a mere pretence, and being now free from all restraint, his life was one of idleness and dissipation. I must now mention a circumstance which I would wish to forget myself, and which no obligation less than the present should induce me to unfold to any human being. About a year ago, my sister, who is more than 10 years my junior, was taken to Ramsgate by a Mrs Young, who presided over her education in town. Thither also went Mr Wickham, undoubtedly by design, for there proved to have been a prior acquaintance between him and Mrs Young, in whose character we were most unhappily deceived. He so far recommended himself to Georgiana that she was persuaded to believe herself in love, and to consent to an elopement.
Oh, Wickham!
She was then but 15. I joined them unexpectedly a day or two before the intended elopement, and then Georgiana acknowledged the whole to me. You may imagine what I felt and how I acted. Mr Wickham's chief object was unquestionably my sister's fortune, which is £30,000, but I cannot help supposing that the hope of revenging himself on me was a strong inducement. His revenge would have been complete indeed.
This must be false. This cannot be. This must be the grossest falsehood.
This, madam, is a faithful narrative of every event, and you will, I hope, acquit me henceforth of cruelty towards Mr Wickham. I know not in what manner, under what form of falsehood he had imposed on you, but his success is not perhaps to be wondered at. Ignorant as you previously were of everything concerning either, detection could not be in your power, and suspicion certainly not in your inclination. I shall endeavour to find some opportunity of putting this letter in your hands in the course of the morning. Yours, Fitzwilliam Darcy.
Elizabeth put the letter hastily away, protesting that she would never look at it again. In half a minute the letter was again unfolded, and collecting herself as well as she could, she again began the mortifying perusal of all that related to Wickham. Every lingering struggle in his favour grew fainter and fainter.
How despicably I have acted. Had I been in love, I could not have been more wretchedly blind. To this moment I never knew myself.
A week later the party made final their plans to depart. Mr Collins took the opportunity of paying the parting civilities which he deemed indispensably necessary.
I know not, Miss Elizabeth, whether Mrs Collins has yet expressed her sense of your kindness in coming to us, but I am very certain that you will not leave the house without receiving her thanks for it. The favour of your company has been much felt, I assure you. We know how little there is to tempt anyone to our humble abode. Our plain manner of living, our small rooms and few domestics, and the little we see of the world must make Hunsford extremely dull to a young lady like yourself. But I hope you will believe us grateful for the condescension, and that we have done everything in our power to prevent your spending your time unpleasantly.
Thank you, Mr Collins. I have spent these past 6 weeks with great enjoyment. The pleasure of being with Mrs Collins and the kind attentions I have received from yourself and from Lady Catherine must make me feel the obliged, sir.
Oh, it gives me great pleasure to hear that you have passed your time not disagreeably. My dear Charlotte and I have but one mind and one way of thinking. There is in everything a most remarkable resemblance of character and ideas between us. We seem to have been designed for each other. Only let me assure you, my dear Miss Elizabeth, that I can from my heart most cordially wish you equal felicity in marriage.
Mr Collins, the chaise is ready. Dear Eliza, how I shall miss you.
And are you, Charlotte?
Please give our best respects to your family, not forgetting, of course, the kindness I had received at Longbourn this past winter, and compliments to Mr. and Mrs. Gardiner. But you have forgotten to leave any message for the ladies at Rosings. But you will, of course, wish to have your humble respects delivered to them with your grateful thanks for their kindness to you while you have been here.
Thank you, Mr Collins.
Farewell, sister. Good gracious, it seems but a day or two since we first came, and now we're headed back to town. And yet how many things have happened?
A great many indeed.
We have dined 9 times at Rosings, besides drinking tea there twice. How much I shall have to tell.
And how much I shall have to conceal.
Elizabeth's impatience to acquaint Jane with what had happened in Kent could no longer be overcome, and at length, once they arrived home to Longbourn, and careful to avoid the parts concerning Bingley, she related to her the chief of the scene between Mr. Darcy and herself.
You do not blame me for refusing him.
Blame you? Oh, no.
But you blame me for having spoken so warmly of Wickham.
No. I do not know that you were wrong in saying what you did. But I do not know when I have been more shocked. Wickham so very bad. It's almost past belief. Oh, and poor Mr. Darcy. Oh, dear Lizzy, only consider what he must have suffered. Such a disappointment. And with the knowledge of your ill opinion, too. And having to relate such a thing of his sister, it really is too distressing. I'm sure you must feel it so.
Oh, no. My regret and compassion are all done away by seeing you so full of both.
Oh, poor Wickham. There is such an expression of goodness in his countenance.
There certainly was some great mismanagement in the education of those 2 young men. One has got all the goodness, and the other all the appearance of it.
I never thought Mr. Darcy so deficient in the appearance of it as you used to do. When you first read that letter, I am sure you could not treat the matter as you do now.
I could not. And with no one to speak to about what I felt, no Jane to comfort me and say that I had not been so very weak and vain and nonsensical as I knew I had. How I wished you had been there, Jane.
Oh, how unfortunate that you should have used such very strong expressions in speaking of Wickham to Mr. Darcy, for now they do appear wholly undeserved.
Jane, there is one point on which I want your advice. I want to be told whether I ought, or ought not, to make our acquaintances in general understand Wickham's character.
Surely there can be no occasion for exposing him so dreadfully. What is your opinion?
That it ought not to be attempted. Mr. Darcy has not authorised me to make his communication public. Every particular relative to his sister was meant to be kept as much as possible to myself. Wickham will soon be gone. Some time hence it will be all found out, and then we may laugh at their stupidity in not knowing it before.
The first week of their return was soon gone, and it was now the last week of the regiment's stay in Meryton. All the young ladies in the neighbourhood were drooping apace.
Good heaven! Mamma, what is to become of us? What are we to do?
How can you be smiling so, Lizzy?
Oh, Lydia, I am sure I cried for 2 days together when Colonel Miller's regiment went away. I thought I should have broken my heart.
I'm sure I shall break mine. Oh, but did you hear, Lizzy? There is no danger of Wickham's marrying Mary King. She's gone down to her uncle at Liverpool, gone to stay. Wickham is safe.
And Mary King is safe.
Oh, but I hope there is no strong attachment on either side.
I'm sure there is not on his. I will answer for it. He never cared 3 straws about her. Who could about such a nasty little freckled thing?
A letter's arrived for Miss Lydia.
Give it here.
Who's sending you letters, Lydia?
Oh, Mamma! It's an invitation from Mrs. Forster to accompany her to Brighton.
Let me see. Why am I not invited too? I cannot see why Mrs. Forster should not ask me as well as Lydia. Though I'm not her particular friend, I have just as much right to be asked as she has, and more too, for I am 2 years older.
Mr. Bennet! Mr. Bennet! Oh, Lizzy, fetch your father.
Yes, Lizzy? Might this concern the noise coming from the drawing-room?
Lydia has been invited to Brighton with Mrs. Forster.
Ah.
You cannot think to let her go. With her general behaviour here lacking all propriety, and the temptations that Brighton would allow, not to mention the little advantage she could derive from the friendship of such a woman as Mrs. Forster.
Lydia will never be easy until she has exposed herself in some public place or other, and we can never expect her to do it with so little expense or inconvenience to her family as under the present circumstances.
If you were aware of the very great disadvantage to us all which must arise from the public notice of Lydia's unguarded and imprudent manner, nay, which has already arisen from it, I am sure you would judge differently in the affair.
What? Has she frightened away some of your lovers? Poor little Lizzy.
I have no such injuries to resent. If you, my dear father, will not take the trouble of checking her exuberant spirits, she will soon be beyond the reach of amendment. Her character will be fixed, and she will, at 16, be the most determined flirt that ever made herself or her family ridiculous.
Do not make yourself uneasy, my love. Whenever you and Jane are known, you must be respected and valued. We shall have no peace at Longbourn if Lydia does not go to Brighton. Let her go, then. Colonel Forster is a sensible man and will keep her out of any real mischief, and she is luckily too poor to be an object of prey to anybody.
Once Lydia departed for Brighton with Mrs. Forster, the house seemed quiet, save for the continuing complaints from Kitty and Mrs. Bennet that they could not have joined her there. The time fixed for the beginning of Elizabeth's northern tour was fast approaching, but when the Gardiners arrived there was news of a change to their journey.
My dear Lizzy, I hope this does not come as too much of a disappointment. Mr. Gardiner's business takes him back to London within the month, and that leaves us too short a period to go so far as the Lakes.
That is grave news indeed.
The time allows us to travel no farther northwards than Derbyshire. As you know, I spent many years of my life in the county, and I should so love to show you all the celebrated beauties of Matlock and Chatsworth. And we plan to stop a night or two at the little village of Lambton, my former residence. I have an acquaintance or two there who I would dearly love to visit.
I shall be very happy indeed to visit a place you love so well.
It was impossible for Elizabeth to hear the word Derbyshire mentioned without thinking of Pemberley and of its owner. After taking in many of the principal delights of the country on their route through Oxford, Blenheim, Warwick and Kenilworth, the party found themselves at last arriving at a charming inn in the little village where they were to stay.
You know, Lizzy, we are only 5 miles from Pemberley here in Lambton. I should so love to see the house again. My love, should not you like to see a place of which you have heard so much? A place, too, with which so many of your acquaintances are connected. Wickham passed all his youth there, you know.
I must own that I'm tired of seeing so many great houses, Aunt. We have seen so many already. I really have no pleasure in fine carpets or satin curtains.
Come now, Elizabeth. If it were merely a fine house richly furnished, I should not care about it myself, but the grounds are delightful. They have some of the finest woods in the country.
But what if the family are at home? It would be such an imposition.
I should think they would be in town for the summer, and if they are present, I cannot imagine we would be admitted into the house. We shall just apply to visit the park.
There then, Elizabeth. You can have no other objection. We shall visit Pemberley tomorrow.
As they drove along, they each watched for the first appearance of Pemberley House with fluttering anticipation. It was a large, handsome stone building, standing well on rising ground and backed by a ridge of high woody hills, and in front a stream whose banks were neither formal nor falsely adorned. Elizabeth was delighted. She had never seen a place for which nature had done more, or where natural beauty had been so little counteracted by an awkward taste. On applying to see the place, they were admitted into the hall.
We were told the family are away for the summer.
Yes, sir, but we expect the master tomorrow with a large party of friends. Now, if you'd like to follow me... Here, this picture here is of the son of the late master's steward. He's gone now into the army, but I'm afraid he's turned out very wild. And that miniature is my master. I'm very like him. It was drawn at the same time as the other about 8 years ago.
Lizzy, can you tell us whether it is like or not?
Oh, does the young lady know Mr. Darcy?
A little.
And do you not think him a very handsome gentleman, ma'am?
Yes, very handsome.
I'm sure I know none so handsome. But in the gallery upstairs you will see a finer, larger portrait of him than this. This room was my late master's favourite room, and these miniatures are just as they used to be then. He was very fond of them. Oh, and here is one of Miss Darcy, drawn when she were only 8 years old.
And is Miss Darcy as handsome as her brother?
Oh, yes, the handsomest young lady that ever was seen, and so accomplished. She plays and sings all day long. In the next room is a new instrument just come down for her, a present from her master. She comes here tomorrow with him.
Is your master much at Pemberley in the course of the year?
Oh, not so much as I could wish, sir, but I dare say he may spend half his time here.
If your master would marry, you might see more of him.
Yes, sir, but I do not know when that will be. I do not know who is good enough for him.
It is very much to his credit, I am sure, that you should think so.
I say no more than the truth, and everybody will say that knows him. I have never known a cross word from him in all my life, and I've known him ever since he were 4 years old.
There are very few people of whom so much can be said. You were lucky in having such a master.
Yes, sir, I know I am. If I were to go through the world, I could not meet with a better.
His father was an excellent man.
Yes, ma'am, that he was indeed. And his son will be just like him, just as affable to the poor. He is the best landlord and the best master that ever lived. Some people call him proud, but I'm sure I never saw anything of it. To my fancy, it is only because he does not rattle away like other young men.
This fine account of him is not quite consistent with his behaviour to our poor friend.
Perhaps we might have been deceived.
That is not very likely. Our authority was too good.
Now this room was made just completely to give pleasure to Miss Darcy, who took such a liking to the room when she was last here.
He certainly is a good brother.
And this is always the way with him. Whatever can give his sister any pleasure is sure to be done in a moment. There is nothing he would not do for her.
When all the house that was open to general inspection had been seen, they returned downstairs, and, taking leave of the housekeeper, were consigned over to the gardener, who met them at the hall door. As they walked towards the stream, Elizabeth turned back to look again, only to see the owner of it himself. They were within 20 yards of each other, and so abrupt was his appearance that it was impossible to avoid his sight.
Miss Bennet.
I am sorry. We had been assured of your absence, or we would not have ventured to come.
Not at all. You were informed correctly. I've returned a day early. Your family are well, I hope?
Quite well, thank you.
I'd not heard you were to travel to Derbyshire. Where are you staying?
At the inn at Lambton, sir.
Oh, I know it well. Do you plan to stay long in the country?
We are here for a week or so more, although heading further north.
And, you've not long left Longbourn?
We have been travelling a little while, sir.
Are you to stay in Derbyshire much longer? A week, you said. And your family, they're quite well?
Yes, quite well, sir, thank you.
Forgive me, I've interrupted your tour. I will allow you to continue and take my leave.
Mr. Darcy himself?
Indeed, Uncle. Forgive me. I should have introduced you, but I quite forgot myself.
The park is so beautiful. I wish we could go around it whole, but I fear it might be beyond a walk. The gardener said it was 10 miles all the way round.
Perhaps a short walk will be enough to see some of the beauty.
The party walked for a half hour before Mrs. Gardiner expressed a wish to return to the carriage. As they turned towards the house, they were again surprised by the sight of Mr. Darcy approaching them at no great distance.
You have a very handsome house here, Mr. Darcy. And the grounds, too, are charming, delightful.
I'm glad you approve of it. Would you do me the honour of introducing me to your friends?
Oh, of course. Mr. Darcy, please allow me to present my uncle and aunt, Mr. and Mrs. Gardiner.
It is a great pleasure to meet you both. May I walk with you all back to the house?
Certainly, sir.
You have a charming park here, Mr. Darcy, and a fine-looking stream.
Do you fish, Mr. Gardiner?
I do indeed, when I can find time.
Then I must invite you to fish here as often as you choose while you continue in the neighbourhood. I can supply you with fishing tackle. This area up ahead is particularly good for sport.
Mrs. Gardiner, who was walking arm in arm with Elizabeth, gave her a look expressive of wonder. Elizabeth said nothing, but her own astonishment, however, was extreme. She thought to herself as she observed Mr. Darcy's attentiveness to her uncle.
Why is he so altered? It cannot be for me. It cannot be for my sake that his manners are thus softened. It is impossible that he should still love me after my reproaches in Hunsford.
Mr. Gardiner, I am tiring greatly, and Lizzie's arm is not as strong as your own for support. May I take yours?
Of course, Mrs. Gardiner.
Mr. Darcy.
Miss Bennet?
Sir, I hope you will accept my apologies again for this intrusion. Your arrival was very unexpected, for your housekeeper informed us that you would certainly not be here till tomorrow.
Business with my steward had occasioned my coming before the rest of the party. They will join me early tomorrow, and among them are some who will claim an acquaintance with you. Mr. Bingley and his sisters. There is also one other person in the party who more particularly wishes to be known to you. Will you allow me, or do I ask too much, to introduce my sister to your acquaintance during your stay at Lambton?
I should like that very much.
We have travelled much of...
You're enjoying Derbyshire, I hope?
Yes, very much. We have visited Matlock and Dovedale, and we have planned a visit to Chatsworth, although I cannot see how it could surpass Pemberley.
We are sorry to keep you.
Not at all. Please, allow me to arrange some refreshment for you after your walk.
Thank you, Mr. Darcy, but we must be on our way now, I think.
Allow me to assist you into the carriage, Mrs. Gardiner.
You are kind, Mr. Darcy.
Miss Bennet, may I...
Thank you, sir.
I hope we shall meet again very soon. Good day, Mr. Gardiner, Mrs. Gardiner, Miss Bennet. Drive on.
He is perfectly well behaved, polite and unassuming. I was never more surprised than by his behaviour to us. It was more than civil, it was really attentive.
To be sure, Lizzy, he is not so handsome as Wickham. Or rather, he has not Wickham's countenance, for his features are perfectly good. But how came you to tell me that he was so disagreeable?
I cannot know. I liked him better when we had met in Kent than when we had in Hertfordshire, and I have never seen him so pleasant as just now.
But perhaps he may be a little whimsical in his civilities. Your great men often are, and therefore I shall not take him at his word, as he might change his mind another day and warn me off his grounds.
I really should not have thought that he could have behaved so cruelly as he has done to poor Wickham. He has not an ill-natured look.
From what I have heard from his relations in Kent, Mr. Darcy's actions were of a very different construction. And his character is by no means so faulty, nor Mr. Wickham so amiable, as we had been taught to believe in Hertfordshire.
Elizabeth and Mr. and Mrs. Gardiner had just returned to the inn the following day after their morning walk, when the sound of a carriage drew them to a window.
Who could that be? Are we expecting callers?
That is Mr. Darcy and his sister, aunt. But I had not expected them to call so soon. Oh, there is Mr. Bingley also.
You seem unsettled, Lizzy. Are you well?
Quite well, aunt.
Mr. Darcy, Mr. Bingley and Miss Darcy, ma'am.
Thank you, Hannah.
Mr. and Mrs. Gardiner, Miss Bennet, may I have the pleasure of introducing you to my sister, Miss Georgiana Darcy.
It is such an honour to meet you, Miss Darcy. I have heard a great many things about you.
It is I who have all the honour, Miss Bennet.
And of course, my dear friend, Mr. Bingley.
Delighted to meet you, Mr. and Mrs. Gardiner. Miss Bennet, I hope your family are all well?
They are indeed, Mr. Bingley, but for wishing to enjoy your society again.
Oh, I'm so glad to hear it. It's been a very long time since I had the pleasure of seeing your sister, your family. It is above 8 months. We've not met since the 26th of November, when we were all dancing together at Netherfield. Are all your sisters still in Hertfordshire?
All excepting Lydia, who spends the summer in Brighton with Colonel Forster and his wife.
Oh, yes. Well, delightful.
I hope we can call again before you depart from Derbyshire, Miss Bennet.
It is my express wish that you and Mr. and Mrs. Gardiner join us for dinner at Pemberley before you leave.
Of course. We should be delighted, Miss Darcy.
The day after tomorrow, if that would suit.
Very much so, sir. We look forward to it.
It gives me so much pleasure in the certainty of seeing you again, Miss Bennet. I have so many inquiries to make after Jane. All our Hertfordshire friends.
It had been settled in the evening between the aunt and the niece that such a striking civility as Miss Darcy's in coming to see them on the very day of her arrival at Pemberley ought to be imitated. They called upon the house the next morning.
How very ill Miss Eliza Bennet looked this morning, Mr. Darcy. I never in my life saw anyone so much altered as she is since the winter. She has grown so coarse.
I perceived no other alteration than her being rather tanned, Miss Bingley. No miraculous consequence of travelling in the summer.
As for my own part, I must confess that I never could see any beauty in her. Her face is too thin. The complexion has no brilliancy, and her features are not at all handsome. Her nose wants character. There's nothing marked in its lines. Her teeth are tolerable, but not out of the common way. And as for her eyes, which have sometimes been called so fine, I could never see anything extraordinary in them. They have a sharp and shrewish look, which I do not like at all. And in her air altogether there is a self-sufficiency without fashion which is intolerable. I remember when we first knew her in Hertfordshire, how amazed we all were to find that she was a reputed beauty. But afterwards she seemed to improve on you, and I believe you thought her rather pretty at one time.
Yes, but that was only when I first saw her, for it is many months since I have considered her as one of the handsomest women of my acquaintance.
Elizabeth had been a good deal disappointed in not finding a letter from Jane on their first arrival at Lambton, but this disappointment was resolved by the receipt of 2 letters from her at once the following morning.
Would you think me awful if I did not join you on your walk this morning, Aunt?
No, Lizzy. You enjoy your letters in quiet. Come along, Mr. Gardiner.
The one earliest must first be attended to. It had been written 5 days ago. The beginning contained an account of all their little parties and engagements, but the latter half, which was dated a day later and written in evident agitation, gave more important intelligence.
Since writing the above, dearest Lizzy, something has occurred of a most unexpected and serious nature. An express came from Colonel Forster to inform us that Lydia was gone off to Scotland with one of his officers, or to own the truth, with Wickham. Imagine our surprise. To Kitty, however, it does not seem so wholly unexpected. I am willing to hope the best, and that his character has been misunderstood. Oh, I must conclude, for I cannot be long from my poor mother. I'm afraid you will not be able to make it out, but I hardly know what I have written.
Oh, Jane, please let this letter contain good news.
Dearest Lizzy, I hardly know what I would write, but I have bad news for you, and it cannot be delayed. Imprudent as the marriage between Mr. Wickham and our poor Lydia would be, we are now anxious that it has not taken place. Mr. Denny expressed his belief that Wickham never intended to go to Scotland or to marry Lydia at all. We believe them to be in London, and all effort has been made to uncover them. Circumstances are such that I cannot help earnestly begging you all to come here as soon as possible.
Where is my uncle? Hannah?
Miss Bennet?
Mr. Darcy? I beg your pardon. I must find Mr. Gardiner this moment on business that cannot be delayed. I have not an instant to lose.
Good God, what is the matter? I will not detain you a minute, but let me, or let the servant go after Mr. and Mrs. Gardiner. Will you go?
Yes, sir, at once.
Is there nothing you could take to give you present relief? A glass of wine? Shall I get you one?
No, I thank you. I have received some dreadful news. It cannot be concealed from anyone. My youngest sister has left all her friends and has thrown herself into the power of Mr. Wickham. You know him too well to doubt the rest. She has no money, no connections, nothing that can tempt him to... She is lost forever. When I consider that I might have prevented it, I, who knew what he was.
I am grieved indeed, shocked. But is it certain? Absolutely certain?
Oh, yes. They left Brighton together on Sunday night and were traced almost to London, but not beyond. They are certainly not gone to Scotland.
And what has been done? What has been attempted to recover her?
My father is gone to London, and Jane has written to beg my uncle's immediate assistance, and we shall be off, I hope, in half an hour. But nothing can be done. How is such a man to be worked on? How are they even to be discovered? I have not the smallest hope. Had I but explained some part of his character, some part of what I learnt to my own family, this could not have happened. Be so kind as to apologise for us to Miss Darcy. Say that urgent business calls us home immediately. Conceal the unhappy truth as long as it is possible. I know it cannot be long.
I assure you of my secrecy on the matter, Miss Bennet. I wish there a happier conclusion to the matter than there is present reason to hope. I am afraid you've been long desiring my absence. Please send my regards to your aunt and uncle.
I shall never see him again.
I promise you, Lizzy, every assistance in my power.
You are so kind, Uncle.
Hannah told us Mr. Darcy was here when you sent for us. Was it so?
Yes. And I told him we should not be able to keep our engagement to dine with them. That is all settled.
Are you two on such terms as for you to disclose the real truth? Oh, Mr. Gardiner, that I knew how it was.
It appears to me so very unlikely that any young man should form such a design against a girl who's by no means unprotected or friendless.
Do you really think so?
I cannot think so very ill of Wickham.
Wickham will never marry a woman without some money. He cannot afford it. And what claims has Lydia? What attraction has she, beyond youth, health, and good humour, that could make him, for her sake, forgo every chance of benefiting himself by marrying well?
But you see that Jane does not think so very ill of him.
Of whom does Jane ever think ill? But Jane knows, as well as I do, what Wickham really is. We both know that he has neither integrity nor honour, that he is false and deceitful.
But does Lydia know nothing of this? Can she be ignorant of what you and Jane seem so well to understand?
Oh, yes. That is worst of all. Till I was in Kent, I was ignorant of the truth myself. I did not think it necessary to make our knowledge public.
When they all removed to Brighton, therefore, you had no reason, I suppose, to believe them fond of each other?
Not the slightest.
They travelled as expeditiously as possible, and, sleeping one night on the road, reached Longbourn by dinner-time the next day. It was a comfort to Elizabeth to consider that Jane could not have been wearied by long expectations.
Is there any news of the fugitives?
Not yet, but now that my dear uncle is come, I hope everything will be well.
Is my father in town?
Yes, he went on Tuesday. He wrote me a few lines on Wednesday to say that he had arrived safely, and merely added that he should not write again till he had something of importance to mention.
And my mother? How is she? How are you all?
My mother does not yet leave her dressing-room. Mary and Kitty, thank heaven, are quite well.
But you? How are you? You look pale. How much you must have gone through.
Oh, I am perfectly well, Lizzy.
What did Colonel Forster say?
He did own that he had often suspected some partiality, especially on Lydia's side, but nothing to give him any alarm. Kitty owned, with a very natural triumph on knowing more than the rest of us, that she had known of their being in love with each other many weeks.
But not before they went to Brighton?
No, I believe not.
And did Colonel Forster appear to think well of Wickham himself?
I must confess that he did not speak so well of Wickham as he formerly did. He believed him to be imprudent and extravagant, and since this sad affair has taken place, it is said that he left Meryton greatly in debt, but I hope this may be false.
Oh, Jane. Had we been less secret, had we told what we knew of him, this could not have happened.
Perhaps it would have been better, but we acted with the best intentions.
Did the Colonel repeat the particulars of Lydia's note to his wife?
Yes, he sent it for us to see.
You will laugh when you know where I'm gone, and I cannot help laughing myself at your surprise tomorrow morning as soon as I am missed. I am going to Gretna Green, and if you cannot guess with who, I shall think you a simpleton, for there is but one man in the world I love, and he is an angel. You need not send them word at Longbourn of my going, for it will make the surprise greater when I write to them and sign my name, Lydia Wickham.
Oh, thoughtless, Lydia, what letter is this? To be written at such a moment. But at least it shows that she was serious on the subject of their journey. Whatever he might afterwards persuade her to, it was not on her side a scheme of infamy. My poor father! How he must have felt it!
Oh, I never saw anyone so shocked. He could not speak a word for a full 10 minutes. My mother was taken ill immediately, and the whole house in such confusion. Oh, but you must go in to Mamma. She's longing to see you.
If I had been able to carry my point in going to Brighton with all my family, this would not have happened. But poor dear Lydia had nobody to take care of her. Why did the Forsters ever let her go out of their sight? I'm sure there was some great neglect or other on their side, for she is not the kind of girl to do such a thing if she had been well looked after. I always thought they were very unfit to have charge of her. But I was overruled, as I always am. Poor dear child. And now here's Mr. Bennet gone away, and I know he will fight Wickham wherever he meets him, and then he will be killed. Oh, what will become of us all? Oh, the Collinses will turn us out before he is cold in his grave. And if you are not kind to us, brother, I do not know what we shall do.
My dear sister, I mean to be in London tomorrow, and I will assist Mr. Bennet in every endeavour for recovering Lydia. In a few days more we may gain some news of them. Until we know that they are not married, and have no design of marrying, do not let us give the matter over as lost.
Oh, my dear brother, when you get to town, find them out wherever they may be, and if they are not married already, make them marry. Oh, and as for wedding clothes, do not let them wait for that, but tell Lydia that she shall have as much money as she chooses to buy them, after they are married. And above all, keep Mr. Bennet from fighting. Oh, brother, how kind you are.
Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen was adapted and directed by Rebecca Cockcroft for White Cobra. This production was recorded separately in the performance homes to adhere to COVID regulations. Find out more about White Cobra by visiting whitecobra.co.uk. The narrator was Liz Clarke, Mr. Darcy was Tom Morrath, and Lizzy Bennet was Amy Whitestone. Mr. Collins was Fraser Haynes, Maria Lucas was Corinna Jane Crabtree, and Jane Bennet was Rebecca Cockcroft. Lydia Bennet was Emily Rose Lyon, Kitty Bennet was Corinna Jane Crabtree, and Mrs. Bennet was Kate Billingham. The Longbourn servant was Rebecca Cockcroft, Mr. Bennet was John Myhill, and Mrs. Gardiner was Mo Shapiro. Mr. Gardiner was Barry Dougal, Mrs. Reynolds was Jude Wilton, and Hannah was Rebecca Cockcroft. Mr. Bingley was Thomas Sparrow, Miss Darcy was Corinna Jane Crabtree, and Miss Bingley was Vicky Kelly.